Have you ever stopped to wonder why so many people who claim to be spiritually awakened, conscious, and full of clarity seem to have such difficulty finding love? It's almost a paradox. Those who should have the easiest time connecting end up experiencing exactly the opposite. And it's not for lack of opportunities nor for lack of desire. There's something deeper, something most people have never realized, and that's precisely what Alan Watts exposes in a way that changes everything. What you're about to hear isn't shallow relationship advice. It's not a cookie-cutter self-help phrase. It's a vision that goes straight to the root of the problem, addressing what underpins the way you view love, life, and even yourself. Get ready, because when you understand this, you'll realize that the real reason awakened souls can't find love has nothing to do with luck or fate, but rather with a blind spot that almost no one dares to touch. Stay until the end, because every detail of this explanation will dismantle long-held beliefs and open your mind to a whole new understanding of what true love is. And this could be the first step towards seeing love in a way you never imagined before. What you just heard has already begun to change the way you see love and yourself. Now you understand why so many awakened souls face this blockage and realize there's a much deeper path than the illusion peddled. This kind of truth doesn't come just anywhere, and that's precisely why it makes sense for you to support this work. Like the video and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that opens your mind in a direct and transformative way. This ensures you're always one step ahead, connected to the next revelations that will further deepen this transformation. When someone talks about spiritual awakening, many people immediately think of meditation, energy, and inner peace. But what almost no one talks about is the real impact this has on daily life, especially on relationships. Being awake isn't just lighting a candle, closing your eyes and feeling connected to something greater. It's much harder and more demanding than that. It's as if you've removed a blindfold and begun to see clearly things that previously went unnoticed. Suddenly you notice patterns, you see manipulative games, you realize how people often relate to each other out of need and fear rather than genuine connection. And when you see all this so clearly, it becomes almost impossible to simply play along and pretend you didn't understand. It's like trying to watch a magic trick without knowing exactly how it's done. The fun is simply lost. This state of lucidity completely changes the way you view love. While many are still trapped in unrealistic expectations, believing that the other person is obligated to fill their voids, you begin to realize that this is just an illusion. And it's at this point that many spiritually awakened people end up feeling a kind of frustration. It's as if they live in a different rhythm, on a different frequency, and this distances them from ordinary people. You've probably noticed that after you start questioning things that once seemed normal, conversations with others change. You no longer have patience for meaningless dramas, for emotional games, for that constant need to prove something. What once seemed acceptable now seems superficial. And here's the thing. This change doesn't just affect you. It also affects how others begin to see you. As you become more conscious, many people around you begin to think you're cold, distant, or even arrogant. But that's not the case. You're not cold. You just can no longer cling to the illusions that once seemed to sustain relationships. You want something authentic, you want something real, but the problem is that most people aren't prepared to offer it. They're still looking for someone to fulfill their needs, while you've already understood that no one can be your other half because you're already whole. And this clash of expectations is what begins to drive a wedge between awakened souls and ordinary love. It's curious because many people believe that awakening would automatically make it easier to love, when in fact, it brings more awareness, and awareness sometimes hurts. You begin to see that in many situations, what people call love is nothing more than attachment, fear of loneliness, or disguised emotional dependence. And how can you accept this when you've already understood the difference? There's no going back. It's as if your heart knows it deserves something different, but that something hasn't yet appeared. This can generate a very strong feeling of isolation, almost as if you're in a place where no one fully understands you. Perhaps you've felt this yourself, surrounded by people, but feeling like something real, something profound, is missing. And this isn't a whim. It's the natural consequence of someone who has awakened to a broader view of life. And this is where a very important part comes in. This awareness also demands a new attitude from you. You can no longer pretend you don't know, because you do. And knowing, you can't accept emotional crumbs, you can't settle for an empty relationship. This is the blessing and the curse of being awake. You free yourself from many things that previously held you back, but this freedom exacts a high price: loneliness. And perhaps this is where you need to reflect. Is it better to live surrounded by illusions, just to avoid feeling alone? Or is it worth facing this loneliness until something truly true emerges? This is the big question awakened souls carry. Comment here. Clarity. If you've ever been through something like this, because I want to know how much this message has impacted you, and don't think this is an exaggeration. The number of people who today live awake to themselves and the world, but at the same time feel disconnected in relationships, is growing. And the worst part is that many end up blaming themselves, thinking the problem lies within them. But it doesn't. The problem lies in the clash between two ways of seeing life: those who still seek love as an escape, and those who already understand love as presence. This clash generates friction, distances, and creates invisible walls. That's why so many awakened people report that, no matter how hard they try, they can't fit into common relationship models. It's as if they speak different languages. Then comes the feeling that there's no room for you in this game. And there really isn't, because this game isn't yours anymore. Your heart yearns for something else, something it hasn't yet found. And it's precisely in this emptiness that the greatest of all consequences of awakening arises. Have you ever stopped to think about how the idea of love that most people carry in their heads was shaped from an early age? Movies, soap operas, songs, they all reinforce the same script. Two people meet, complete each other, and live happily ever after. It sounds beautiful, but behind this story lies a huge illusion. So-called romantic love isn't exactly love. It's a social construct full of unrealistic expectations that, deep down, imprisons rather than liberates. Alan Watts talked a lot about this. He said that the problem isn't love, but rather the weight we place on love, as if it were the solution to all our life's problems. And when you awaken to this understanding, you realize that much of the suffering in relationships comes not from a lack of love, but from the insistence on believing in this illusion that never comes true the way we imagine. The illusion of romantic love makes people search for the perfect partner, as if someone were destined to fill every inner void. And what happens? When they find someone, they project all their expectations onto them. They want the other person to be a safe haven, a salve for their pain, a constant source of happiness. But no human being can bear that weight. Then inevitably frustration sets in. The awakened person realizes this more quickly, and that's why they end up feeling out of place. Because while everyone else is involved in the games of conquest, the rehearsed phrases, the empty promises, they look and think, this isn't real, this isn't love, this is neediness in disguise. And when you see through the trick, you can no longer believe in the magician. The problem is, by refusing to live in this illusion, you automatically distance yourself from the majority. It's interesting to observe how this happens in practice. Imagine a common conversation between two people who are just getting to know each other. One of them tries to impress, hides flaws, exaggerates qualities, creates an edited version of themselves to please. This is standard. It's what society calls conquest. But to someone awakened, it rings false. They don't want the edited version, they want the truth. And when they realize the other person isn't willing to show who they really are, interest simply fades. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt that people try so hard to appear to be something that they end up forgetting who they really are? If so, comment here. Reality, because this point is fundamental for us to understand where the big flaw in this illusion lies. Romantic love also fuels the idea that life only has meaning when you find someone. It's as if being alone is synonymous with failure. This creates a desperate race to find a partner, where many people enter relationships without even stopping to consider whether there's truly a connection. The important thing is not to be alone, because being alone is seen as a problem. The awakened soul doesn't buy this lie. It understands that being alone can even be healthier than sharing your life with someone who has nothing in common with you. But this attitude of not settling for less scares those still trapped in illusion. It's as if you say, "I'm not going to play this game," and the other person responds, "Then you're no good for me." It's hard, but it happens every day. And perhaps the cruelest aspect of this illusion is that it causes people to confuse attachment with love. They want to hold on, control, and imprison the other person. They confuse possession with affection. They think jealousy is a sign of passion, when in fact it's fear. They think dependence is proof of surrender, when in fact it's insecurity. And the awakened soul sees this clearly, perceives the poison hidden in the sugar. It knows that love isn't a prison, it's freedom. But most people haven't yet reached this understanding, and this creates a huge gap between those who have already seen it and those who continue to live within the illusion. And it's precisely in this gap that the feeling of being out of place arises, as if you're an outsider in the crowd. This shock is inevitable. Those who awaken begin to realize that the illusion of romantic love isn't just a detail, but rather the foundation on which most relationships are built. And when you take away that foundation, everything crumbles. It's painful because you start to feel like you don't fit in, but at the same time it opens space for a much greater truth, something that isn't sustained by fantasies but by presence. The question is, what happens when you decide not to participate in this illusion? How does the world around you react to this? Choice? This is precisely where the next consequence comes in. When you begin to see beyond the illusion of romantic love, something happens almost automatically. Loneliness sets in. It's not that you choose to be alone because you like it, but because the filter of consciousness becomes so strong that many things that once seemed acceptable no longer serve you. It's like a change in your taste buds. If you were previously accustomed to fast food full of artificial seasonings, now your body craves something purer, more natural, and suddenly those old options no longer satisfy. The same thing happens in relationships. You look at the superficial conversations, the games of interest, the need to prove love with empty displays, and you simply can't fit in anymore. And this creates a feeling of distance, as if you were physically present, but in another world. This loneliness isn't just a lack of company, it's the natural consequence of not allowing yourself to live in illusions again. What many people call love, you now identify as attachment, fear, or convenience. What for them is romanticism, for you is simply an escape from yourself. And when you see so clearly, you can no longer deceive yourself. But this clarity comes at a price. Suddenly, it seems like no one around you speaks the same language as you. It's like being at a party full of lively people, but the music they're listening to doesn't make sense to you. You try to dance, but the rhythm doesn't match. And it's at this point that loneliness becomes inevitable, not because you want it to, but because your heart can no longer accept living a lie. The curious thing is that to others, you may seem cold, demanding, or even difficult to love. But in reality, you're just seeking authenticity. You don't want to waste any more time on something that lacks truth. But the world isn't used to that yet. Most people prefer a comfortable illusion to an uncomfortable truth. So, when you insist on truth, you end up being seen as the problem. This misunderstanding deepens loneliness even further, because you begin to feel like someone who doesn't fit the mold everyone insists on repeating. And there's no point in forcing it, because once you wake up, you can't unlearn what you know. It's like waking up from a dream. You can't dream the same way again. And here comes an important point. This loneliness isn't weakness. It's a sign of maturity. It's the price you pay for choosing truth over illusion. But it's a high price. How many times have you felt it would be easier to settle, to accept a shallow relationship, just to avoid feeling that emptiness? How many times have you thought that perhaps it would be better to play the game, even though you know there's nothing real about it? These thoughts pass, but deep down you know you can't fool yourself for long. Therefore, loneliness becomes an almost obligatory path for those who no longer accept anything less than reality. This phase, as painful as it may seem, is also the most educational. It reveals who you truly are without masks, because when there's no one to please, you discover your essence. You begin to realize that you can walk alone, that you don't need another to exist. And, as difficult as it may be, it also gives you strength. You begin to truly know yourself, to respect your limits, to value your own company. It's a solitude that hurts, but at the same time, it's constructive. It's at this moment that many awakened people begin to develop an inner strength they never imagined they had before. And of course, loneliness also reveals a paradox. You understand that true love is freedom, presence, and not possessing. but at the same time, you miss sharing this vision with someone who truly understands. It's like holding a precious flame, knowing few would be willing to extinguish it. And this heightens the feeling of being out of place. But perhaps this phase is less about finding someone and more about preparing for a love that doesn't follow the usual pattern. This wait, however long, serves a purpose. It's shaping you toward something that doesn't fit the mold the world insists on repeating. I want you to comment here on the word true. If you've ever felt this loneliness, not as a lack of people, but as a lack of authenticity, this helps us realize how many are going through the same process and strengthen this journey together. And it is precisely from this loneliness that the next question arises. When you understand that love is freedom and not possession, what happens to the way you relate? This is where an even deeper paradox arises, one that shows why awakened souls seem increasingly distant from ordinary relationships. After loneliness becomes almost inevitable on the path of those who awaken, a paradox emerges that makes everything even more complex. Freedom. Because, on the one hand, you discover that true love can only exist when born of freedom. No control, no possession, no suffocating demands. But on the other hand, this same freedom frightens, bothers, and even drives many people away. It's as if you've understood a secret rule of the game, but upon revealing it, you realize that almost no one is willing to play that way. Most still confuse love with dependence, passion with jealousy, surrender with self-denial. And when you no longer accept living this way, it seems that love becomes an even more difficult territory to inhabit. Alan Watts said that love can't be a prison. It has to be like a flowing river. But in practice, what we see are people trying to dam this river, put up fences, create conditions, force the other person into patterns of emotional security that deep down are nothing more than fear. And when you're awake, you realize this immediately. You know you can't demand that someone be always available, that they never change, that they meet all your expectations. That would be suffocating. But when you offer this freedom, many interpret it as disinterest. It's curious because the freedom you offer, instead of bringing someone closer, often drives them apart. It's the paradox of freedom. The freer you love, the harder it seems to maintain that love in a world that expects control and guarantees. Let's be honest, who hasn't heard phrases like, "If you love me, you need to prove it to me," or "If you love me, you can't do this"? These demands are everywhere, and for most it sounds normal. But for an awakened soul, it sounds like a prison, because you've already understood that love that needs to be constantly proven isn't love, it's insecurity. True love isn't sustained by tests, but by presence. But when you position yourself this way, people accustomed to the logic of possession feel lost. They confuse your freedom with detachment, and what was supposed to be a gesture of maturity ends up being seen as coldness. This creates an even greater shock, because on one hand, you just want free love, but on the other you end up being interpreted as someone who doesn't care. This paradox is one of the greatest dilemmas awakened souls face. You don't want to control, but you also don't accept being controlled. You don't want to demand, but you also don't accept living superficially. So what's the way out? The truth is that this kind of attitude requires a level of awareness that few are willing to achieve. For many, love is still seen as possession and a guarantee. For those who are awakened, love is movement, it is flow, it is the choice to be together without obligation. But how many people do you know who are prepared to experience something like this? Very few, and that's precisely where the difficulty of finding love increases. This paradox also creates another problem: fear of the other side. Many people are afraid to be in a relationship with someone who is free because they think they'll lose control. They think freedom is synonymous with abandonment, when in fact, it's the only solid foundation for a love that endures the test of time. But this fear causes many to give up before even trying, and the result is that those who awaken end up attracting curious glances, but few real connections. It's as if you've discovered a precious key, but most prefer to stick with familiar locks. Comment the word here: freedom. If you've ever experienced this paradox of loving without attachments and yet being misunderstood, it will be interesting to see how many people share this same experience. And it's at this point that the reflection deepens even further. Because if freedom is the essence of love, but at the same time frightens and drives so many people away, What then is Alan Watts's answer to this dilemma? Is there, after all, a possible path for awakened souls to experience a love that is neither prison nor loneliness? It is precisely this vision that begins to reveal itself in the next point. After understanding loneliness and the paradox of freedom, comes the part many people are waiting for. Is there a way out after all? Alan Watts said yes, but not in the way most imagine. He explained that true love isn't something you find like someone seeking a prize. It's not a goal you need to achieve to feel complete. Love for him is something that happens when you are whole, present, and without expectations that the other person will fill your voids. And therein lies the key. While many people still see love as dependence or necessity, the awakened soul learns to see love as a natural expression of someone who is already complete within themselves. It seems simple, but it isn't, because it requires abandoning old illusions, relinquishing control, and accepting that love cannot be forced. Watts insisted on something that seems obvious, but which shatters almost every fantasy we harbor. Love only exists in the now. It can't be saved for later. It can't be a promise for 10 years from now. Nor can it be a contract to guarantee the other person will never change. When you understand this, you realize that much of what they call love is actually fear of the future. People who demand constant proof, who ask for guarantees, who try to hold on to the other person at any cost, are trapped by the fear of loss. But for Watts, love is precisely about not being afraid of impermanence. It's about looking at someone and choosing to be with them today without the need to imprison tomorrow. This understanding is liberating, but also frightening, because it requires courage. And here's a point that resonates deeply. For those who are awakened, true love isn't about dependence, but about sharing. It's about two whole people who find each other and, instead of trying to complete each other, overflow together. But how do you find someone willing to live this way? This is the question that echoes in the hearts of many people on this path. Watts said it doesn't depend on desperate searching, but on presence. When you stop obsessively searching, when you stop treating love as a goal and start living fully in each moment, that's when love appears. Not because you forced it, but because you became an open space for it to flourish. And it's at this point that many awakened souls understand why they haven't yet found love. It's not because something is wrong with them, but because the love they're waiting for isn't the love the ordinary world usually offers. While some want guarantees, others want freedom. While some want possession, others want presence. And this difference creates a space for waiting. But Watts saw this waiting not as a punishment, but as a process. He believed that the more you learn to live in the present, the more likely you are to attract someone who is also in that same state. And when two people meet at this level, love ceases to be neediness and becomes something much greater, something truly transformative. Of course, it's not easy. Living this way requires a kind of maturity few people possess. It requires letting go of fear, control, and even the idea of a happy ending that society insists on pushing. But Watts didn't see this as a problem, but rather as a path. For him, love isn't the destination. It's part of the journey. It doesn't appear to fill holes, but to overflow the fullness of those who are already whole. This vision may seem radical, but when you understand it, you realize that the real challenge isn't finding someone, but becoming someone ready to experience this kind of love. What you just watched has opened your mind to understand why so many awakened souls struggle to experience love. Now you see patterns that previously went unnoticed and have a clarity that transforms the way you relate to others and yourself. And since this revelation has brought value to you, it's only fair that more people also have access to this truth. So, like and subscribe to the channel. It's your way of spreading this knowledge and allowing more people to awaken to this new vision. Write the word transformation in the comments to show that you truly absorb this message. And don't stop there. The next video will take this reflection even deeper, revealing something that could forever change your perception of relationships and consciousness. Click now, continue this journey, and prepare for the next step of this transformation.